We are now live. 3, 2, 1. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. He's a returning guest. We talked back on June 14th, 2019 about his excellent true crime book titled Angel of Darkness, the true story of Randy Kraft and the most heinous murder spree. And that was kind of during my researches into the smiley face killings phenomenon. I highly recommend the book. A lot of true crime people do not know about this serial killer, Randy Kraft, but provided some incredible insights into that kind of that section of that kind of true crime environment. So I really enjoyed that. But we're going to talk tonight about a book that he just published in October. The title of that book, which you can see on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube, the title of the book is Operation White Rabbit, LSD, the DEA, and the Fate of the Acid King by Dennis McDougal, published in 2020. And it was a fascinating book. I read the entirety of the book. It provided me with many insights into that underground drug culture, and also about somebody whose name I wasn't familiar with. So he's going to talk more about that. Mr. McDougal, are you there?
I am indeed.
Awesome.
Great to be here.
Great. Well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. And we just decided to go live stream on short notice. So Dennis was game for it. So here we are. We will take questions after the interview. But for people who aren't familiar with you and your many books, I think it's like 13 books at last. Let me see if I can go back here. There's the list of his books. Angel of Darkness is there. Mother's Day, Last Mogul, Lou Wasserman, MCA, and the Hidden History of Hollywood, The Yosemite Murders. So a bunch of very interesting titles. This is the most recent title. But for people, like I said, who know your name, you talk a little bit about your background and also what led you to your inquiry in this book on the subject of Operation White Rabbit.
Sure. I'm a lifelong recovering journalist. I got I cut my teeth, I guess, many decades ago at various Southern California newspapers, the Riverside Press Enterprise, Long Beach Press Telegram, and then finally, I spent a 15-year hitch with the LA Times in the 80s and 90s. And I've written for the New York Times over the years and TV Guide for quite a while. And eventually segued into writing books. My first title was Angel of Darkness, which was Mr. Ramsey just got finished telling you. Was the story of Randy Kraft, a little-known serial killer, at least in terms of the pantheon of Ted Bundy and Dahmer and the like, but nonetheless very prolific, and for like 13 years until he was discovered by a couple of California highway patrolmen with a dead Marine in his passenger seat. He did in somewhere between 67 and 92 young men who were hitchhiking and made the mistake of riding with Randy. And that became the basis of my first book, Angel of Darkness. I've written, I guess it is 13. I hadn't counted them up, but I've written 13 books. I'm working on a 14th at the moment. This latest one, Operation White Rabbit, the genesis for it goes back to 2006. I had a writing partner at the time, Linda Marsa, who's still out plying her craft to this day. And Linda had a much broader and deeper background in psychedelics and the scientific or medical aspects of psychedelics and LSD than I did. And she called me up one day and said, Dr. Albert Hoffman is celebrating his 100th birthday in Basel, Switzerland next month. We ought to go there and interview him. For those who are among the uninitiated, don't know who Albert Hofmann was. He was a Swiss chemist, biochemist, who worked for Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, is now known as Novartis. And he's best known as the man who discovered LSD. He stumbled upon it way back in 1939 and didn't really pay much attention to the weird side effects of it because he was looking for a drug for Sandoz that would help women with their postpartum blues and their possible hemorrhaging after giving birth. So he set the chemical aside, and one day in 1943, he accidentally dosed himself with just a tiny bit of this stuff, and his whole world began to collapse. So he waited a week and prepared himself, and then tried it not by accident, but on purpose. One Thursday in April of 1943, took it just before he knocked off work, hopped on his bicycle and rode home. And he later described that first trip on LSD in phantasmagoric terms. The sky went wavy, everything became iridescent and day glow, and he could hear colors, and he could see sounds. His had a little music coming in there from the side. I'm like going, no, maybe I dosed it a little bit of it too. I'm not sure. But at any rate,
but it's kind of like a legendary moment in the history of psychedelics. Was Hoffman, his bike ride,
right?
Still, the day is still celebrated of what, April 19th or whatever, where this one little event kind of spread all throughout the world.
Yeah, it's Bicycle Day, and it's still observed on an annual basis by psychonauts all over the world. At any rate, Hoffman was turning 100 years old, and as a direct result of this event, my writing partner suggested that we hop on the next plane to Switzerland and try to get an interview with him. We did. We sold a Q&A to Playboy magazine back when it was still a magazine, and then we spent the weekend in Basel at this celebration. And the first thing that we picked up on when we got there was that virtually everybody who was anybody in the psychedelic movement was there to pay their respects to Hoffman. So we immediately hired a Swiss camera crew, which consisted of a sound man and a guy with a Sony recorder, video recorder, and spent the next 2.5 days interviewing anything and everyone that moved, because we figured that this was a golden opportunity to try to get these people on camera, many of them quite old at the time, because they weren't going to live forever, and we thought that this might be an opportunity to document the cultural history of LSD. We acquired about 25 hours of videotaped interviews at the celebration. And when we got back to California, we expanded on it and started interviewing people who didn't show up at the celebration. People like Aldous Huxley's widow, Laura Huxley, and Abram Hoffer, who was Humphrey Osmond's research partner in Canada. A number of people who have since passed on, because what we had in mind was attempting to do a definitive documentary of the history of psychedelics and how they fell out of favor, courtesy of Richard Nixon and the whole war on drugs movement. And then, slowly and surely began to make a comeback with the turn of the 21st century. So in the course of all of this, I mean, you see how this goes on and on, but in order to get to the central question of how my book, Operation White Rabbit, came into being, in the course of all of these interviews, we kept coming across the name of an LSD martyr, if you will. The name was William Leonard Picard, a fellow who was busted in an abandoned Atlas missile silo outside of Wamego, Kansas, and charged with manufacturing 1 million or more doses of LSD to be distributed in some sort of a worldwide network of acid distribution. So I kept hearing the name, and I tracked him down on the internet. He was doing 2 life sentences plus 20 years. I don't know why somebody tacked on 20 years. The big joke was that he was a Buddhist, and thus the 20 years would account for his life after death. But Picard was at the time cooling his heels at the U.S. penitentiary in Tucson, or just outside of Tucson. So I started writing him letters, and he responded. He was terse and guarded at first, but then later on, we started exchanging phone calls when he could get to a phone. And then ultimately, even the U.S. Bureau of Prisons has come fighting and screaming and into the 21st century, and decided that they needed to allow their inmates access to email. So we were able to communicate via an email setup that the Bureau of Prisons still has in place, called Core Links.
And what year was this around, Dennis? Sorry to interrupt. This is around, was this 2000? When did you start communicating with Pickard?
Oh, okay. I guess 2007 or 8.
So it was
it was right around the time that Obama was elected.
Gotcha. So this has been, I mean, for 2020, you've been in communication with Pickard for some time before the publication of this book.
Oh yeah, and in fact, I mean, it goes a lot deeper than that in a number of ways, because initially I approached him as a journalist, approaching the subject, and and I tried to get him to cooperate, and he was reluctant, and he gave me his reasons why, and we found common ground in our love of writing and reading and literature. I encouraged him to begin writing, and the result of all of that was that he enrolled in a prison writing program overseen by a professor at the University of Arizona. And he became the star pupil and cranked out his own memoir, The Rose of Paracelsus, which he self-published. It's like 650 pages long. In one way, I recommend it because it's colorful and gives you a firsthand look at his thinking about psychedelics in general and spirituality and how it all connects. On the other hand, it's a daunting read. Anybody who's been challenged by, I don't know, James Joyce or Infinite Jest, and found it hard sailing, probably should stay away. But if if you're really dedicated, it's quite revealing, and beautifully. There are beautifully written passages in the book. But at any rate, he self-published, and it became kind of a cult classic among psychonauts. Psychonauts being the general term that is applied to people who have a predilection for psychedelics, whether it be LSD or psilocybin mushrooms or mescaline.
TMT,
Yeah.
MDMA. So these guys are doing all that. And it's interesting. Paracelsus was one of the first alchemists. So it's a theme within your book, but also in the sensibility of these people around Picard and people around him, is that they were kind of tinkering around with, or Shulgin. They kind of felt to me like modern day alchemists.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any question of it. I mean, that's what they did. These are people who bucked the system, even when Nixon, for what now appears to be purely political reasons, cracked down on psychedelics, made them equitable with cocaine and heroin, which is totally bogus, and tried to criminalize the use so that people would be discouraged from even trying it, for fear of being sent away the way that Leonard was.
And I mean, maybe this is a difficult question, but who was, I mean, he's a very complex, multifaceted character. Who was Picard, and how did he make his way into the psychedelic world or underground?
Well, I mean, that's really the basis of the book, because in many respects, I probably should just, have titled it, the biography of Leonard Picard, because it really is built around his life story. Picard was I don't know, something of a science prodigy who came out of the suburbs of Atlanta in the early 60s and was brilliant. I mean, even his classmates to this day will usually start off their descriptions of Lenny Picard as being one of the smartest, if not the smartest persons that they've ever encountered. But as is often the case with genius, he had a downside, or a dark side, or whatever you want to call it. And at the same time that he was graduating with honors from his high school, and winning a full ride to Princeton University. He was also out experimenting, and with not at this point with LSD, but with other drugs and with alcohol and the like. And he stole a car, drove it across state lines, and wound up in front of a judge who saw to it that he was sent away for a while, and he spent many months in an infamous rehab in Connecticut, where he was summarily diagnosed as a narcissist by the attending psychologist or psychiatric examiner, and he never really was able to pull himself out of that that initial run-in with the law. He was bent on exploring biochemistry and neurology, and even with the onslaught of Washington and the entire establishment, I guess, against psychedelics in the late 1960s, with the jailing of Timothy Leary and Alice Lee Stanley. Leonard was not persuaded to stay away from it. He wanted to continue to try to explore chemistry and its effects on the human psyche, and its connection with perhaps a higher spiritual being. He was caught up in all of the spiritualism that Ram Dass and Leary and the people who came out of the psychedelic experiences of the late 60s, they may have been scared into passing it up or leaving it be so that they didn't wind up spending more time in prison. But Leonard was not dissuaded.
And it takes a certain type of intelligence to actually make these drugs. So the way in the book, it's a very kind of tight knit or small community of people who are aware of each other. And that was one of the interesting aspects of the book.
Yeah, I mean, during this period, the cutoff point was like 1970, because what you had going on the outside was LSD was first outlawed in 1956, but then it was criminalized essentially in 1970, courtesy of the Nixon White House and John Mitchell's Justice Department. They came up with the draconian drug laws that we're still living with to this day, unfortunately. And Tim Leary became the most wanted man in the world. God knows why, other than the fact that he had a big mouth and he liked to drop acid now and then. But it was classic Nixonian politicking. Don't look at what my left hand is doing. Just watch the right hand here, where I'm saving your children from LSD and this terrible Leary character. So, LSD became as vilified as the people who promoted it. I mean, and the whole idea that it could have really salutary positive effects all was swept under the rug, and abject fear took hold among the populace because the media latched onto it, and they're still doing it to this day.
Right.
Saying that LSD will, make you walk into traffic or jump off of a building or God knows what all.
There was that famous case of Art Linkletter's daughter flying out of a building, and that really kind of changed people's ideas. I think he talked about it on Johnny Carson, if I remember correctly.
Well, all of that is true, but if you dissect the case and you take a hard look at it, they were never able to establish that she had LSD in her system or anywhere near her when she jumped out of the building. B, she had a history of bipolar tendencies, if not out and out psychosis. And C, there was never any evidence that she had ever even dropped LSD. And that was Art Linkletter speaking in his wacky, reactionary, Sean Hannity voice, screaming and yelling on the airwaves about how his daughter died because of Tim Leary. And it was probably 99.9% bullshit. So anyway, that's.
But Picard, like, he knew. I mean, he thought of himself as the kind of offspring of Leary, or somebody carrying on the torch from Leary. But he was mixing. He was just so well connected and always kind of orbiting all of these institutions and sitting in on lectures and things like that. So he's getting knew Carrie Mullis, all these other kind of famous figures, Shulgin.
Mm-hmm.
So he was definitely networked.
Yeah, no, I mean, Picard was, his background. I mean, if you go back to the earliest years with him, his father was an attorney, a corporate attorney in Atlanta. They were well heeled. His stepmother was a leading scientist, fungal biochemist in her own right at the fledgling CDC in Atlanta. And he was raised, to pay close attention to science in general, but more specifically to take a hard look at biochemistry and how the mind interrelates with the body and with physical physiology, how physiology and neurology are inextricably intertwined. And, with that kind of a background, it pretty much established a vector for his career for the rest of his life. I mean, it's ultimately what sadly landed him in prison because he would not give it up. And I get that because at this late date in my life, ever since I got involved in this, looking at it seriously after Dr. Hoffman's birthday, I get it. I mean, it's incredibly and intensely fascinating, and may ultimately be the salvation of mankind. I don't know. I mean, but the connection, between biochemistry and these substances like LSD or mescaline or DMT and human behavior it seemed to me they're vital. I mean, these are connections that we ought to have been exploring for the past half century, but we haven't been able to do that thanks to politics.
Right. They kind of have been. There's been independent underground explorers, right?
Yeah,
Shogun and some of these other people, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. So you had all these characters.
yeah, but
Um,
they're all seen, or they were all seen for a long time by the establishment as being either criminal or close to criminal. So, you know, it's hard to practice your science when you're looking over your shoulder and hoping that the DEA doesn't break through the door and send you to prison for the rest of your life, and which is essentially what happened to Picard.
right. I mean, they kind of were on his trail for a while, but he kind of grew up with like Owsley, Hubbard. There's other characters too who are kind of spreading the kind of I wouldn't just call it LSD. I would just call it designer drug, maybe, because it wasn't just LSD, but they were spreading it around. Can you talk? I mean, and Picard is watching these developments. Can you talk about the Brotherhood of Eternal Love and what happened to some of those guys and how they were important to Picard?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can talk about it, and maybe I can try to put it into some sort of perspective, because the mythology that evolves around something like the Brotherhood and the reality are two different things. I mean, all these people who were featured in the famous or infamous wanted poster that was put out by the California Department of Justice. It was like, I don't know, a couple dozen faces on this single wanted poster, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, and you know,
You have that in your book, right?
yeah, it's in the book. But you know, the stories that have come out of there, come out of the Brotherhood, would lead people to believe that there was some sort of some sort of underground conspiracy, which again is bullshit. You know, these people, number one, are not conspirators because they're generally loners. They're people like Tim Scully, who would just rather that people leave him the hell alone. He just wants to. He would like to practice his science without people looking over his shoulder and telling him that he's doing this or that or something else wrong. And this is like true of most of these people. There's no grand conspiracy. The Brotherhood, you know, the thumbnail sketch version of the Brotherhood is that they became the distribution arm of Owsley Stanley's Orange Sunshine, most famously, but you know, all of the LSD that he manufactured in the mid to late 60s eventually began to be distributed by the Brotherhood. Most of these guys were not chemists. They weren't particularly even erudite necessarily. They were surfers. I mean, these were guys who were.
It's Laguna Beach, right? Was the
Yeah, we're part of the surf scene down in Laguna Beach in Orange County, and this was an easy way to make a lot of money, or at least pretty good coin, with a little effort. It was shady business. Truth be told, the bulk of their trade was in hashish, not LSD. That was almost a sideline. They were into marijuana, hashish, hashish oil, and they became famous, notorious, whatever, because they came up with ingenious ways to smuggle the stuff in and out of Turkey and points east. And
right. Well, the reason I kind of brought him up is Picard was in the proceedings, right? So it's Hitchcock, Mellon Hitchcock, who comes from Millbrook with Leary, then goes to the West Coast, Brotherhood of Eternal Love, and Pickard's kind of observing and drinking in this whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, Picard maintained then and still to this day, I believe. I haven't talked to him for a week or two, so I don't. I mean, but I mean, so I can't imagine that his opinion has changed in the last 10 days. But Picard maintained that he was never a member of the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. He knew a lot of its members, but you got to remember, Picard was he was a kind of a loner. I mean, he was not. He had his network like we all do, but he wasn't part of any kind of cabal that was interested in storming the establishment and dosing everybody with LSD. That was never part of his game plan. He was interested in perfecting the chemistry, and he was probably the most notable student of Alexander Shulgin.
Right. So I mean, but he's kind of observing all of that stuff. Picard is, and he always says that he wants to be low key, unflashy. How does his kind of operation of creating LSD and other, new drugs, how does that evolve?
Okay, well, he gets kicked out of Princeton in the 60s, okay? And in a way, the next 30 years for Leonard Picard is a running attempt to get back into the scientific brotherhood that marked his beginnings. When he graduated from high school, he felt as though he had been admitted into the scientific brotherhood exemplified by Albert Einstein himself. In fact, the first place that he visited when he went to Princeton was Einstein's house. Went up and knocked on the front door. So when he got bounced because he stole a car, the trajectory for him was kind of set in stone for the next 30 years, partially through his own personal choices, because he envisioned himself as something of a rogue and a vagabond. He traveled around. He had his microbus and was very much a stereotype in that sense of the quasi hippie who's always on the road in the 60s and 70s. And he visited communes and he hung out with loose women and became a loose man. But the whole time, he was also very much interested in pursuing science, and more specifically, biochemistry. So everywhere that he went and stayed for any period of time, he found himself enrolling or at the very least sitting in on classes having to do with neurobiology. he was he was the guy, the scholar on the outside. He was always the guy with his nose up against the window, watching the latest evolution of chemistry, and he wanted desperately, in some ways, to be readmitted into that fraternity.
And he had spot jobs. He was a lab assistant at Berkeley. He audited classes at Stanford. He's in Woodside. So he's kind of in that kind of group. People that he know are the Grateful Dead and the Warlocks, and these kind of characters are all kind of definitely in Northern California. Shulgin lives south of Berkeley. I think he's in Orinda or something like that, or close to that. So, I mean, he kind of developed, but I mean, he definitely was making significant amounts of LSD for distribution. There was only a certain amount of people who were able to do it. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with it. I think for a while he was more enamored of MDA and MDMA than he was LSD, but that was only because Shulgin had discovered it, and Stan Groff, another light in the LSD movement, had decided that MDMA or ecstasy was a psychotropic drug that could help enhance people's thinking and tendencies towards spirituality. But he was constantly looking for better and better ways to not just manufacture LSD, but to develop the very best of Shulgin's recipes too. He was definitely, I mean, there's no question about that. If you want a norm, a standard for who Leonard Picard was, he was a he was a believer, a true believer in better living through chemistry, and
he also had kind of a spiritual element to him. He was also a Buddhist, practicing Zen Buddhist who progressed up that path. He was definitely involved in Esalen, aware of that kind of environment. So I think he's firmly rooted in that. I mean, I think if you juxtapose him with kind of like his nemesis Skinner, one is really interested in pushing those boundaries of experience, and Skinner's just in it for the money and the benefits of having all that money, I guess.
Yeah, again, you go back to the beginnings, which is what I tend to do. I'm something of a Freudian when it comes to human behavior. I'm a strong believer in roots and mothers and fathers, and where you come from kind of defines where you're going. If you look at the rudimentary beginnings of Picard, and you put that up against a character like Gordon Todd Skinner, you're going to find I don't know, the alpha and omega, the positive and negative sides of the same coin in many respects, I guess. Skinner was psychochemistry with all of the trappings that the DEA warns against. I mean, he is the personification of some Vincent Price character who gets a hold of an evil potion and passes it around purely for purposes of greed and personal gratification. And I don't believe that that was true of Leonard. I mean, I don't think that Picard then or now was interested in getting off, if you will. I mean, one of the things that, just niggles the hell out of me is even my good friends, and I have I can think of 2 or 3 right off the top of my head, who ought to know better, but they say things like, "Oh, does your book come with uh, acid tabs, or am I going to be able to go to the picture insert in the middle and find something so that I can drop acid myself?" First of all, the answer is no and no. And secondly, um, that's exactly the kind of um, horseshit thinking that powers a bogus agency like the Drug Enforcement Administration, which should never have been created in the first place. The FBI was doing just fine without them. They're a self-perpetuating agency that is designed to um, keep people from experimenting with drugs because that's going to kill them, and somebody needs a papa and mama to oversee what they put into their own bodies, unless it happens to be alcohol or tobacco, which will kill you. I don't know.
That's a good point. I mean, the deaths from alcohol and tobacco are probably 10,000 times more than any psychedelics.
No kidding.
Yeah,
No kidding.
at least.
The,
I mean, it's the stories are great. It covers that great arc all the way up till he's arrested, and you have a picture with Picard, so you know him fairly well. He was released in your postscript. He was released this year from jail, so he is
yes, nobody ever figured that was going to happen. That came to everyone, including Leonard. That even came to Leonard as a shock. I emailed him on a Thursday in July, as I tended to do pretty regularly, to see how he was doing and see whether or not he was locked away because of COVID. He and his cellmate hadn't seen anybody since March. So I was checking in with him to see if he needed any books or whatever. And, he was telling me in his email, well, I'm getting along. It's not pleasant, but at least we have email back now. I hadn't been able to communicate with anyone for months, so that's a blessing. That was on a Thursday. The following day, he was released. He'd been applying for these compassionate releases for months beforehand. I knew all about that, but even he was gobsmacked by it. He had no idea. He had to figure out in 24 hours time where the hell he was going, how he was going to get there, and how he was going to communicate with his network of well-wishers as to where he was going to land. He had no idea. So,
where was he last? Wasn't he? What penitentiary was he in?
Tucson.
Tucson, gotcha. So
Yeah.
he kind of was around that area before his arrest. He was in Kansas, Arizona, kind of that area as well. So, yeah, it's a great book. I really enjoyed reading it. I highly recommend it to my listeners. Where can people find the book? Do you have a website, or is Amazon the best place, or what do you recommend?
Well, yeah, I mean, Amazon's the best place for everything, it seems like. I mean, if you need and toothpicks or dog treats or Operation White Rabbit, go to Amazon.
And do you have a few minutes to take a couple questions from the watchers, viewers?
Sure, what the hell? Why not?
Okay. Here's the first one. Ask Dennis's opinion of the recent Oregon drug legalization. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a long time coming. I'm happy that that the voters of Oregon have more common sense than members of Congress or the dumbass Drug Enforcement Administration, which should be wiped off the map tomorrow or yesterday, actually. And I'm happy that adults, at least in one of the 50 states, are being treated as adults who can actually figure out what a substance might do to them if they took it, and not have to answer to the federal government or fear a break-in from cops taking them down for the crime of putting something into their mouth and swallowing it.
Gotcha. I mean, I remember there was a documentary about the legalization of all drugs. I think it was in the Netherlands or somewhere, and they did the statistical things. And even with legalization, they found that drug usage didn't change. I got to find that study. It's really amazing. But the legalization didn't start some tsunami of users automatically using drugs. So here's another one for you, Dennis. Do you use an old school? This is a kind of author question. Do you use an old school typewriter? What time of day do you find productive? Early morning, late night?
That's coming from Blacktooth Fox.
Yes.
Oh. All right, Blacktooth. Well, I used to use an old Underwood for many years, but I got switched over courtesy of the Los Angeles Times. I got switched over to PCs in the 90s, and then took a further step into Appledom in the 21st century. So now I use a laptop most of the time. What time of day do I find most productive? Hands down, the morning. It may be just a function of age, as you can tell by my face and lack of hair. I'm an altar cocker of many years, so I need a good night's rest when I wake up. After I let the dog out and have a couple of tankers of caffeine, I'm ready to roll. I can usually get, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 hours of really good writing time in between 6, 7 in the morning and around 10 or 11, at which time I head out to the dog park. I'm not a late night writer anymore. I used to be 20 years ago, but by the end of the day, I'm ready for a good documentary series on Netflix. That's about it.
He does mention Skinner in the book. Skinner is an important part later on in the book, so he definitely goes into a lot more detail about the silo and things like that. We just didn't have the time to cover it. There's a lot more information in the book than anything we've covered in this hour. This is the question. Leonard was present during the torture of Brandon Greed. That's who went to jail for the. I don't think so. According to Dennis's material, that's not the case. But do you mind answering that? Was Leonard there when Brandon Green was tortured?
No. I mean, Leonard was found guilty in 2003, I believe, and he was, once he was taken into custody in November of 2000. He never stepped outside of prison again until he was released this past July. Right. So, no, the Brandon Green episode was solely a Gordon Todd Skinner production. That happened. When the hell was that? I think that was 2004 or 2005. Anyway. That all happened in Oklahoma, courtesy of Skinner and crystal coal, and there was one other principal who came forward and was the primary source for the feds, or not the feds, the state officials who took him down. So no, the short answer is no.
And what do you see as the future of synthetic drugs? Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I see them as inevitable. On the other hand, as with plastics and other synthetics, I'm suspicious. My natural tendency would be to, if you are interested in drugs, that the more natural they are, the better. That's not to say that Anne and Sasha Shulgin were not pioneers in this area and didn't do some great work in terms of trying to figure out the effects, neurological, psychological effects of synthetics on human behavior. But I just, if you're going to dabble in this stuff, I would look, I personally, I mean, everybody's, Oregon, if Oregon hasn't taught us anything else, it's that it has definitely taught us that we are all adults if we're over 21, and unless we have some sort of addled brain that can be proven, the decision on what we should take should be left up to us, not to some government official. If you are of that mind, if you want to try something, I would try something natural, not something that has been invented in a test tube.
That might lead to the next question, which is, what's your opinion of psilocybin for psychiatric therapy use?
I think that psilocybin has been proven hands down by people like Charlie Grobe and the team of scientists at Johns Hopkins. I can never pronounce that because it's like a double professor. Johns Hopkins. And NYU. I think that it's been. I think you'd have to be a fool to think that that you didn't get a positive result from a controlled dosage of psilocybin. It's been used in end of life therapy, which I'm more familiar with than the other stuff, but it's also been shown to help people quit smoking. It has been used successfully in treating alcoholism. It's been used in post-traumatic stress, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and most notably, it's been used in a pretty big clinical study at Johns Hopkins in connecting people with their fundamental spirituality. It's, that may be the most astounding effect that we've seen thus far.
There's another question from Burning Man. Look into Skinner's connections to Burning Man. I know you mentioned him in the book. He was arrested at Burning Man. Do you know anything else about Skinner and his connections or Picard to Burning
Man? Well, I know, I feel like even though Skinner has spurned me, I have made several attempts to interview him, to reach him. He always defers to another writer he has working with him on his version of things. So he's never spoken to me directly, but having reviewed literally thousands of pages of his courtroom testimony and the DEA's files on him, the Operation White Rabbit files on him, and interviewed in depth several people who've known him and were part and parcel of the whole silo buildup. I feel like I have a pretty good idea of who he is, how he operates. I think he is a garden variety narcissist and sociopath. How he got to be that way is up for grabs, but I don't think you have to look too much further than his mother. I think that he's a monster, and I think that the DEA made a bad bet when they decided to go with him as their chief witness against Picard, because I think that Skinner was, is, and will continue to be a criminal. That is his bent. That is who he is, and those people at the DEA who decided that he was going to be their star witness turned out to be fools.
Gotcha. And is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we wrap this up? Anything I missed? Anything just to put the bookend on this?
This book was all about surprises, almost from the very beginning. It took a long time to sell. I mean, it was a lot harder getting it into print than it was researching. I mean, once I was able to speak one-on-one with Picard and get him to tell me where he was coming from and what his MO was, that all came relatively easily. But the thing about Operation White Rabbit that I suppose is the most surprising is that there was no way of planning it. Is, like literally weeks before it saw the light of day, and God knows what role it may have played in it. Leonard maintains that it had some sort of a role at any rate. A federal judge finally came to his senses and said, "Come on, 2 life sentences plus 20 years for making LSD when there isn't even any evidence that the LSD amounted to much more than an ounce or two? That's crazy." He didn't say that, of course, in his order, but ultimately you read between the lines. And fortunately, there's somebody sitting on the federal bench who has a modicum of common sense. All of a sudden, like weeks before the book comes out, Leonard is a free man. And
yeah, it's amazing the timing.
I could not ask for a better epitaph to my 10 years of work on this book, because no one deserves it more than Leonard Picard. His his life is not that of a Sir Galahad. He's made his mistakes. He's screwed up plenty, and he'd be the first to tell you that. But the punishment did not match the crime, and the government is in an absolutely indefensible position. Thank God that there was somebody on the bench who realized that before it was too late.
And do you have social media? Where can people reach out to you if they have any questions or anything they'd like to follow up? Maybe they didn't get answered in this interview. Where can people reach you?
Well, I have a website, dennismcdougal.com, but I'm also on Facebook, and my dog has his very own Instagram page.
Just like
Travels with Bernie. Where are you, Bernie? Just a moment. I'll introduce you to Bernie.
Okay.
Come on, Bernard. Wow. Yes, here's Bernard. He's got his own Instagram page.
Nice. What's his Instagram page?
It's Travels with Bernie is the name of it.
Travels with Bernie. Sweet.
Yeah, and I'm trying to encourage him to write his own book. He hasn't taken to it just yet, but
well, maybe you have to find out whether he's a late night writer or an early morning writer like you. We're still having trouble with learning the keyboard. That's a challenge.
This is the keyboard. See? Yeah.
Great. Well, so you can reach Dennis on Facebook or his website, dennismcdougal.com. Highly recommend this book. Again, the title of the book is Operation White Rabbit, LSD, the DEA, and the Fate of the Acid King. Thank you so much, Dennis, for your time.
My pleasure. This has been fun.
Good. Awesome. Well, have a good night.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.